Bob Long is going to open us up with an introduction to what is early successional habitat. Good way to give us a good basis for moving forward. So everybody welcome Bob Long. He's been a fantastic collaborator. He's made a lot of things happen in this state. He's helped advise and get this thing going. So this wouldn't have happened without Bob. So I'm going to bring up his presentation right now.
All right, well, thanks a lot, Luke. And Eddie, great job getting this thing together. You know how to pack a room. So fantastic. It's exciting. Thought we'd, it's a very diverse audience here today. And we've got, folks with varying levels of experience with habitat management. So we thought we'd give you, just kind of get everybody on the same level when it comes to understanding what types of habitats we're talking about. And for those of you that are, longtime habitat managers, you can just tune out for the next 5 minutes, go get a bagel and a cup of coffee. But for the rest of you that might just be kind of new into trying to understand what we're talking about and the habitats that are involved, we're good to go. We'll just try to real quickly hit on some of the habitat types that we'll be talking about through the remainder of this program. So, there we go. Okay, so back to intro to habitat ecology here. Just a diagram of succession. You've got two types of succession, primary and secondary. We're not dealing with succession from bare rock anymore, so we're looking at secondary succession where if there's some sort of disturbance, and in this case there's a fire, okay? We can think of this as a timber harvest. The disturbance could be a 200-year period of crop production. But we're coming out of that and say you just walk away from, something has taken away that plant community and you're walking away. What will happen through time? And this will happen in different lengths of time, depending on soil conditions, moisture, various factors. But the general progression will be similar. First year or two, you'll have your annual grasses and weeds. What we think of as weeds. Your herbaceous vegetation. You got things like foxtail, ragweed. Some of those plants. You're gonna move into more of a perennial grass stand typically after 2 to 3, 4 years. Get things like broom sedge, some of the plants that can be very good for the species that we're talking about. And then through time, you'll start to get your shrubs, briars, blackberry, small trees will begin to encroach in this part of the world. Sweet gum, red maple, some pines will start to become established, and those trees will, of course, continue to grow and start to shade out other trees. At some point, you will lose that ground vegetation, and then that's kind of where I sort of draw the line on early successional habitat. It's everything prior to that. It's where we don't have canopy closure, still sunlight on the ground, there's still herbaceous vegetation, and then diversity of vegetation. Like I said, this will change depending on the site and the conditions that are present. So just go through some of the different forms that it can take throughout the state. Grassland habitat, this is from Chino Farms, a great example of a managed grassland in the state. Predominantly grass, but there is some herbaceous component there. And this could also, grasslands also encompass grazing lands. And I think there'll be a talk or two on some of those types of habitats as well. Shrublands, of course, are dominated by shrubs. And these are just some of the terms that you'll see thrown around. Dominated by shrubs, and despite there being some exotic shrubs and grasses in here, this was a fantastic area for quail for a period of years. Super high densities of birds until it succeeded into mature trees, and now they're gone from this site. That was about 20 years ago. Forwardlands, probably a term that you haven't heard as much. I really like this term. I just started hearing this being thrown around in maybe the last 4 or 5 years. Grasslands, grasses are fine, but a lot of the species that we really are interested in thrive in areas that are dominated by these broad-leaved herbaceous plants. And here we've got ragweed and partridge peat predominantly, super good habitat for quail, turkey broods, and a lot of other species. So I wish we'd see more of that foreland usage. And then kind of combination, and again, just some terms you'll see, old field meadow habitat. Old field habitat, you get this from fallowing land, just letting it revert. It's amazing what the seed bank holds. Some of these species can persist for decades. And you just let an area go fallow and you'll see a ton of beneficial plants show up. So you'll see that. It's kind of a mixture. It could be herbaceous or grass dominated combination. And as a transition from, is my time up? So as we transition into some of the later stages of early successional habitat, you get into what we might call young forest. And this might be a 5-year-old following a clear cut, a 5-year-old regenerating timber stand. Great habitat for some of the other species like woodcock and ruffed grouse that we have more out west. And then you get into a little bit of more of a gray area when it comes to some of this. We've got forests that have been managed in some way. And so it's not necessarily a young stand, but it was managed to provide that kind of structure and diversity of vegetation at ground level that still provides habitat for early successional species. So here you've got a thin loblolly pine stand that's had some timber harvest followed up with some prescribed fire, and you can provide some good habitat that way. And that could also happen with a natural disturbance as well. So you could have insect damage, wind, ice damage, a variety of disturbances, just most commonly done with timber harvest. Woodlands and savannas are two other terms that you might hear thrown around. Basically a similar type of habitat, kind of depends on how many trees are remaining in that stand. Typically we think of savannas as a fairly low density of trees like this, and woodlands are more of that like 30 to 60% canopy coverage. It's maybe easier to understand what's not quail or not early successional habitat. And like Luke said, we have a ton of this in the state. We've got fairly mature forest with very little understory. We have a lot of crop fields and agricultural fields. Although it's early successional, it's like too early to be habitat. So it might be early successional, but it's not providing that habitat. And mowed grass. We've got a ton of mowed grass in the state. I just was looking this up. A cool picture. I just kind of wanted to put it in there. This pavement is also not early successional habitat, even though these quail are crossing a road that on either side of this is some excellent habitat. This is down in Dorchester County. I think they're looking for the habitat as well. But I just looked into this as I was doing some research for this presentation. We've lost over 1 million acres of agriculture and forest land to development in 50 years. So since 1973, it's like a little over 1 million acres. Just blew me away. That's a lot of land we've lost to development. So let's work on making what we have left as good as possible.
Is that Maryland?
It was on, I forget where it was,
Okay.
but yeah,
That's a lot
that's,
of land.
yeah, it is. I think it was just national land cover data, just a summary of that. A quick little sidebar, just a couple slides here, because we get a lot of questions that, okay, is this type of habitat, we're talking a lot about disturbance and something has to happen to create this habitat. Is this a natural, would this really have been here in much quantity, prior to European settlement? So, we kind of have this romantic vision of this is what Maryland was like, from the mountains to the coast was this like parkland of large trees with a nice carpet of leaves. But what I just wanted to kind of throw out there to get you thinking about it is that there is a lot of evidence of frequent fire, frequent disturbance on the landscape. That these species that we're dealing with have evolved with this constant state of disturbance. This is just one of the models, and you can argue over the details on some of this stuff, but likely most of the state burned every 2 to 10 years. These were either set by Native Americans or lightning strikes. And the folks that were on the fire down Dorchester last week, how far would have that fire burned if we hadn't controlled it? And there were roads there, luckily. But yeah, so lightning strike fires are still happening, and they would have really altered the landscape historically. So in my mind, of course, we don't really know, but what would have it looked like? Probably most of the state would have looked something like this. Would have resulted in a mixed pine oak, savanna, or woodland with abundant sunlight and a really good, well-developed layer of vegetation at ground level. And of course, we had large grazing herbivores, which would have, further altered that, and it probably would have been really good habitat for things like bobwhite quail. Last point I want to make is that to keep these habitats early successional, you need to do something to keep them in that state, or they will want to transition into later successional habitat. Out of Leopold, I'm sure many of you have heard of, father of wildlife, modern wildlife management and conservation, said it nearly 100 years ago now, that you can use some of the same tools that we use to destroy this habitat to restore it. We can use axe, cow, fire, plow, and you'll be hearing more about each one of these habitat management techniques. And you can disc, you use timber harvest, mowing could probably be included in that category. Fire is a great way to manage this type of habitat. And then, like I said, we should hear some talk about using grazing methods to manage grassland habitat as well. We don't have spot spraying. I don't know if they were spraying herbicide in Aldo's days, but might include that as well. I think that's all I had.